Now, you heard it a million times that I got this breakthrough on what is the fifth and sixth day all about. And I worked out the idea that the fifth day is fearfulness. Now what does that mean? That means that it's so universal and comprehensive a term that any situation in life, at any level and at all times, has in it some kind of an element of fearfulness. Either, and I made a continuum, ill at ease. It goes from the feeling of not being at home, a feeling of being at ease, not at ease. Okay? It goes on a continuum from simple, not strong feelings of fearfulness to terrorism at the other end of fearfulness, or living next to a volcano that goes off every once in a while, and there's a civil society there, and people live. We had it here in Jerusalem when we had the Intifada, and everybody knew somebody who was on a bus, and got every single person in Jerusalem woke up the morning with saying, "Oh, I got to see the paper. I got to do this. I got to do that." In other words, there are man-made fearfulnesses and not man-made. A tsunami and this volcano, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so I indicated that this was for me a big discovery because I had got stuck for 50 years on what the fifth and sixth day is all about. And the first are easy to see. The first one is existence. Second one is Havdalah, differentiation. Third one is spatialization. The fourth one is temporalization. And I got stuck for 52 years not knowing where to go. What was I doing? I was saying I had an intuition. At that time, it goes way back, when I studied this parsha about the Bereshit story, I felt that embedded inside the story, as it's usually understood as a cosmology or a cosmogony or whatever, about the origin of the world and so on, inside of that, there was something else, which was a piece, a self-contained piece on how Moshe thought. What was his way of thinking? I don't know where it came from, how I got it. It just came into my head as an intuition. I solved the first 4 days and I got stuck on the fifth and sixth day. And this last year when I got the breakthrough, and the breakthrough you heard before, just in one line, in the old story, it's the creation of the non-domesticated animals on the fifth day. And on the sixth day is the domesticated animals and the human being. Now, for agricultural society, that was at the time, to differentiate between domesticated animals, which are part of the agriculture, and non-domesticated animals is a very important thing. I mean, okay, but I got this crazy idea that, what's this all about? What non-domesticated animals? Non-domesticated animals, when they all of a sudden get together, they could wipe out a settlement. If snakes, scorpions, this, that, tigers, lions, whatever, non-domesticated animals, pitom, all of a sudden, for whatever reason or whatever cause that caused them to get excited and so on, bingo, they could raid a city and wipe it out. So then it dawned on me that's like a tsunami and like the flood and like other things where you had this notion. And then I said, okay, so the topic of the fifth day is fearfulness. Okay? Then when I saw how comprehensive it is and where it shows up and what is it, how do we define it, how do we exemplify it, and so forth, the world opened up. You can't stop writing about all the things that it's involved. So I wanted tonight to, and I said that this piece of self-contained 6 points, 6 days piece provides a template of how to study the text. It's not just stam in the middle. It has a value, a methodological value. And tonight I want to exemplify that methodological value with 3 or 4 or 5 pieces short from the Torah, from the Chumash, to show you how it operates, how the thing operates. And I promised myself I'm going to give you homework, because the next time you should try it for yourself. Pick a story from the Chumash, anything you want, and after I give a few examples, the best test would be that you do it yourself. When you do it yourself, you'll see how it opens up, and unbelievable, you'll discover things. You're saying the story for so many years in the Chumash. When the parsha comes, and all of a sudden you'll open up the question, okay, and the answer to the question gets opened up, and opens up a whole realm of ideas and meanings that are attached to the story. Then the reader can judge and relate that to Rashi, to the Ramban, and so on, and to classical Meforshim, to contemporary Meforshim, and see where it fits. Does it fit? Is it true? Is it false? And so on, so on, so on, so on. So the toelis, the value for method is fantastic. And since it's so comprehensive, it covers every single thing that you want to cover in life, and kal v'chomer, anything you want to cover in the Chumash. Okay, so we'll start with the first one, and this one is Moses and Korach. Okay, in Bamidbar 12, this is the place where it says Moshe Anav Mikol Adam, that Moses was the most humble of all people. Okay, where do we get that? Anav. Anav in general has been taken to mean humble. And Rashi, in 2 words there, I think in the Perush, he says humility. Okay. But a little more care on linguistic roots and on widening up the perspective. I'm not a Google man, but sometimes, to ask how to spell something or something, it tells you right on the spot. So, what is this thing? I want to say that this means meek, not humble, but meek, M-E-E-K. In the Elevate Dictionary, other synonyms are poor, weak, whether it means physically or spiritually or whatever, but it does not exclusively mean humble. So it could carry a different meaning. And what I want to do tonight is to show you in this story how, if it carries a different meaning, what is it? And how does it change the story? And then what do we gain from the whole business? So let's assume that it means meek, weak. What do you mean weak? What's the story? You remember the story with Korach. Korach wants to make the revolution, break up the society because he wanted to be from the Kohen and not Moshe. Why should you be there? Mm-hmm. It should be me. Blah, blah, blah. We don't need all of psukim, but that's the basic thing. And then it says, in that context, the only place where it says, Moshe Anav Mikol Adam. Okay. So the traditional view is humbleness, humility. The view that I want to give for tonight is that Moshe Rabbeinu, from the beginning, he didn't want to lead. He was forced by the text to be a leader. He didn't want to meet Aaron, he didn't want to do this and that. So he became a leader. Our first introduction is that he killed this Egyptian when the 2 guys were fighting, and he said, who are you to be the leader, and blah, 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 blah. So at an early stage...
Well, it doesn't seem meek.
No, okay.
He kills somebody.
Yeah, okay. Wait. I'm going to get there. No, so I'm only saying, he was fearful about leading. Okay? But, as the story unfolds, we see a lot of masculinity. We see a lot of masculine traits. A feminine trait would be you meet a guy and he's too big, you run away. A masculine trait is you fight, you get a bloody nose, you go home, but you get the satisfaction of putting up a good fight. So on the assumption that Moshe, when he was young, before he took over the leadership, was afraid of leadership. I mean, that is a fear. Afraid of failure, afraid not coming up to snuff. Okay, so as the story Chumash unfolds about Moshe from Shemot on, we see strengths. We see he had Yitro, he listened, he thought through the best possibility. Oh, this is a good idea, I'm going to restructure the way the society is organized. I'm not going to do the whole thing myself, I'm going to delegate responsibility. That's a big thing. Today, in the old city, the great success of who's there? What's the name of the yeshiva there? Of
Zilberman?
no, the
Weinberg,
big
Rabbi Weinberg.
Aish?
yeah,
Aish Torah.
the big success of Aish Torah is that the Rav who was heading it delegated responsibility to the graduates. He didn't even know what was going on in half the things that were going on. Somebody got through the school, so he had an in-group, and he had a smicha, some didn't, and so on. And he said, okay, I want this. You organize it. And he gave it extra little bit on salary and so on. And his success worldwide today came in good part from the ability to say, look, even if you could do it, to put the time and the money and everything in there and the infrastructure and everything else, why not give it over? Why not give it over? Okay? So there's a value for that. And I think, okay. So, and in business, in the business world, I knew somebody who needed something to be manufactured as part of the whole structure of the thing. And he said, oh, he's going to organize a company to make it. I said, look, I'm not a business person, but it's just plain common sense. The more you organize, the more you have to have infrastructure that you can trust, that won't steal, dumb down blind. The Jewish press, for example, I know for many years, the guy was skimming money off the top for the advertisements that people pay $1 for. If you look in every paper, they have ads, 2-liners, and they could run 6, 8, 10 pages. That's big money. I mean, that's not, So I remember there was no supervision. They let him go. So he said, no supervision? What the hell? I'll take 50 cents on each $2. Okay, it takes 50 cents, and each paper comes out with 5,000 ads, 1-liners. Well, he ripped the bankroll. So much they had to go to court and fight it out, blah, 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 blah. And of course the money disappeared, and they never got the paper, never got back the money that was lost, skimmed off the top. So I said, look, you don't have to be business person, it's just common sense. You don't do that. Let another guy make a buck. It was essential for the thing, for the project, but it wasn't essential in terms of the real essentiality. To buy a nice flower pot, it makes a nice office, but it's not like buying a piece of equipment that has dials and meters and all the rest of the stuff. So there's levels of usabilities here, and this is the case. So there is an overcoming, but it came from there being an anxiety, a fear, a stream of consciousness which said to Rabbi Weinberg, maybe the guy won't do the job by wasting the money, putting in all this time and everything else. But all this stream of consciousness and everything else is expressing a little bit of anxiety, which is on the end. If it stopped him from doing everything, we'd say, oh, that's already going into mental illness. I mean, but in normal life, okay, so we learn to live with our fears. We don't face the fears. So what do I say? Okay, Moses looked like he's good, looked like he's leading throughout until we get to this thing with Korach. By Korach, we see he's not a leader. When I used to read the Parsha, when the earth opens up and swallows up the people, I said, I never was at home with that. I said, why are you relying on God to make a split in the thing and the people fall in? It didn't have the right sniff for me.
When I first read that, I thought Moshe dug the hole, covered it over, and trapped him.
Okay, so you were bothered by the same thing. Yeah. And you gave even more. You gave a positive answer, which made sense. And that's what I'm saying. So it came to this issue that raised its head of this thing. So an old problem, old fears, because fears can remain, relatively speaking, some fears remain a lifetime. Some fears are never overcome. Some fears are overcome and the consequences are not the way you expected, and so on, so on, so on. So, what was happening here? So Moses All of a sudden his fear of leading came back, and we interpret Anav to be impoverished, poor, weak, and so forth. And the text is saying, like Jean was saying, look, why didn't he do something? Why didn't he act? He should have done something and said, look, we got to talk. Okay? Before you take a big move, we got to talk. Roni, as a matter of fact, when I mentioned him last week, Roni said that he gave a shot on the story is that there were two groups. One group was the Kohanim, and one group was the leaders, the political leaders. So Roni said that for one group, they were able to talk. For one of the other groups, they didn't talk. They didn't want to discuss it. So what's he going to do? I mean, you say do something. So the first step would be to talk it out, see if you get a compromise. Because to have civil revolution is one of the worst things that any government can have, because it's 50% on this side, 50% on the other side. The net result, from one point of view, is, well, injustices, Britain, colonies, United States of America. I mean, but on the other hand, it breaks up the society. And one of the things you want to avoid at all costs is the breakup of society. You want to have a certain continuity. As a matter of fact, as you all know, that in the Federalist Papers, and comes from straight out of Aristotle, one of the big problems of politics is continuity of the structuration. And the argument against kingship was that you could have a benevolent king, a benevolent monarch who lives and breathes for the people. But his son, the heir to the throne, may not be as good. When King Hussein, who was a mama's boy, a love boy in Washington, they ate him up. Every time he went to Washington, he was like red carpet and everything else. Everybody. I was worried. I said, look, his son's going to come in. You think he'll be able to hold it? Maybe Intifada will get to him and this, and there'll be shifting of the structure. I said, he's not in the league of his father, even by looks and everything else. He's just not in the league. So this was the whole pattern. So anyway, I said, so this word, Anav, Mikol Adam, could very well mean weak. And in this particular story, we see that it's like an exaggeration statement. Moshe, Anav Mikol Adam, is to say, oh my God, this guy, Moshe, he's one of the worst. He's one of the lowest on the pole. Okay? So you could re-look at the chapter, from the point of view that Moses failed to conquer his fear of leadership. That's what the story's about. He didn't lead, he backed off, and he let something happen that showed that he deserved what came down. So in a religious context, it's obvious, right? I mean, it's God who did the job. But what do you do with Gene? What do you do with the thing? His intuition was Moshe dug the hole and did the thing. So what do we discard it? Oh, it turns out that when you follow it through, you have this interpretation.
Why is it one of the 10 things? Why is it listed by the rabbis as one of the 10 things?
That's a good question. But the answer is a simple thing. I said it many times. When you deal with how the Gemara world, even before that, how the prophets, but how the Gemara world looked at this, you have to now enter their structuration and not the text. Here, I'm dealing with an ancient Near Eastern text. In this respect, I'm just like the biblical scholars who are studying the text with no interest in religion, even against religion and against Torah and all the rest, but they're trying to understand, for whatever reasons, what is going on in the text. Okay? So, that's what happens. So I'm looking at it like that, and I'm saying it could have been that in the ancient Near East, way back, before Chazal came on the scene, they took very seriously being strong, being masculine, being, doing something, being a man of conviction, leading, where you have to say, you got to do this and you got to do that, but this is the case. When I was heading up this corporation there on the newspaper, so I remember that we had a special for the newspaper. They have specials. You get advertisements and everything. So I bought gifts for everybody. The girls were typists, and Freddie was there. And when it came to giving them out, they were still around for years, and I threw them away and gave them away to people. Why? I feared that this one will talk to this one and say, oh, you got this, and I got that, and this I like, and this I don't like, and this. I said, oh my God, what am I going to get? The net result's going to be they're going to come in the next morning with sour faces because I bought, for the higher people, I bought better ones, out of my own money. I spent, and for the lower ones, I gave gifts appropriate. But I couldn't lead. And that's not the only example. When a girl in the office, I would come in and I'd say, look, you should do this. I was responsible for the paper, make sure there's no problems that come out. We used to print Jerusalem Post and all that business. Okay, I was responsibility. It was my responsibility. But if a girl said, look, I'm going to do it my way, I said, no, I suggest you do it this way. All of a sudden my voice changed from do it. I'm telling you, I thought about it through, and this is the best option. To suggestion, and then say, okay, do what you want. To say do what you want is not to lead. To lead, you have to be able to say no for certain things, and yes for other things. You can't be indecisive. To be indecisive is not a leadership quality. Okay, so here was an example, and you can multiply all the examples. So the basic point over here was that the wording, the text, and everything could carry a meaning that had to do with conquering one's fears. So, when it came to Chazal, to your question, they weren't talking about this. They weren't concerned with how a person conquers his fears. That wasn't on the top agenda. Their top agenda was the relation between man and God and how this enters the whole system and so forth. So they weren't concerned with all of this. The text doesn't say it was a miracle. The text doesn't say anything like that. The text doesn't even say that coming out of Egypt was a miracle. It doesn't use the word miracle. Word for miracle is nes. It doesn't say nes in the Yetziat Mitzrayim story. And I read a piece by a guy named, I forget his name, from the Royal Society, who wrote a book on the military expertise of Moses. Meaning, and he was there, and he went to visit the site. He was an archaeology person. So an event, I think Dawson. His name was Dawson, D-A-W-S-O-N. You can get it in the library. He wrote a book called Moses, Military Expertise of Moses, and he showed how Moses took them out so that Paro could not outflank. As you know, in ancient warfare, outflanking was, if they could outflank you, you lost. In military strategies, for many long time, the goal was not to allow somebody coming in from the back, because then you have to fight on two fronts, and you know the rest of the story.
That's still not today.
Yeah, okay, but I'm only saying, but this is the basic orientation, and so this is the thing. So even over there, by military expertise of Moses, what did he do? He had the desert on one side, okay, the mountain cliffs on the other side, and the
sea,
and the water in the front, and there's something else. I forget about it. Whatever, there was four. Anyway, he took them out in a U, and he went in such a way that, look, they would have to go in the water because that was there. But maybe something will happen that Paro will get messed up, and not. So Paro went after and went in, and the heavy wagons that were carrying the big military, and he got stuck in the mud, and then you have Ozir Moshe and the whole beautiful story. Okay, so again we have the same basic point.
Just,
Here is this.
Just a quick
Yeah.
textual correction. That pasuk that you're talking about
Yeah.
comes from the story of Moshe and of Aaron and Miriam complaining against Moshe for marrying
It's
the
not in.
Cushite.
It's not in. I thought it was in the Korach story. It's not in the Korach story.
It's from the story where they complain
Okay.
What happens?
about
Good.
about the woman he married.
Good. Okay.
That's
Okay.
one thing, and just to know,
But his response.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
The-
Numbers 12:3.
Right.
From Midbar 12:3.
Yeah.
Oh, that's already about.
that's
about-
earlier in
That's
Bamidbar.
earlier. Okay.
What is
And-
his responses to their complaint?
Sorry.
At that point, his response is described as being
No, he doesn't respond. Hashem responds, and it says that Moshe is the most humble of all men on the earth.
Also, just to know,
But there is a connection made with Korach, because Korach is swallowed up by the earth,
Yeah.
does
okay. I mixed it
teshuva,
up.
does teshuva, says every day, every month,
okay.
I don't know, that Moshe Emet, Torah Emet, and he became the most humble man, but not on Al Pnei Adama,
Okay.
not on the earth,
Okay.
under the earth.
Okay. But again, this is going back to the other psalm. So
To
thanks for telling me that. So
also,
that's
King James version
Yeah.
uses the translation meek.
meek.
Just so you know.
Yeah. Now, I want
What's
to
the
talk
difference
about
between
that.
meek and
So
humble?
wait a
is
minute.
like
I want to
afraid.
show you I want to
Diminutive.
show you
afraid.
aside from the mistake that I made, but I want to show you the power of what's going on. So by continuing the whole line to get more material to build up this idea that he failed, he would have to live with not having conquered leadership, and of course then the punishment fit the crime. I mean, at the rock and everything else which you talk about, he didn't go into Eretz Yisrael not because he hit the rock, but because he relied more or less on the same procedure that he used before, and it worked. Instead of reevaluating the situation, he relied on something from the past. A good leader says, 30 years went by, and I better look at the situation again. There was a book that came out by Logan and Zafran that Greg gave to me, fantastic piece on 3 laws of perfection. And one of the main point, the guy's method was so good that they changed Harvard University Business School curriculum based on the guy's book. What was the basic point? He said, look, here's a guy who inherits the business. And he says, oh, wow, my father did this, my father did that, my father did this. And he says, okay, I'm going to continue. And all of a sudden, 10 years down the line, the business goes bankrupt. And he said, I did what my father did. Yeah, but 30 years, things changed. The economy changed, you changed, he changed. I think change is built into the nature of the human being. Everything changes. Okay, some changes are relatively slow, some changes are fast, some changes have big implications, have less implications, and so on and so on. So what was the mistake? What was the mistake? They didn't re-examine the corporation from the new perspective. Had they done that, they would have made changes on their own. But they were afraid. They were afraid to make changes. And especially since it worked for 20 years under their father's domination, so of course. So when I read the book, Greg gave me the book, I didn't read it in the beginning, and then I got the spare time to read it. All of a sudden I read the book. It's like one of these books that you can't put down. And I was on the machine, and I wrote 12, 13 pages of Torah, taking off from this crazy book. This crazy book. It made me realize that it could be that there was some situations like that in the Chumash. And here's one of them, the one that I developed over here. So the basic point is this. Now, in following the thing up to get more material, so I checked the spelling and this and that, and I happened to come across, just before turning it off, the first Google entry said something that caught my eyes. It said that in the Greek and Roman period, the notion of meekness, not humility, meekness was an honorable term. Namely, a king would speak of himself as being meek. And in the Roman, Greek and Roman period, the translation of the word anav as meek had an honorable definition, even though it could carry the notion of poor, like on Yom Kippur, ani, with an ayin, okay, is translated to afflict. Anitem, you should reflect your souls. Benji, when I mentioned this, he jumped because it was so true. It doesn't mean afflict. It means to impoverish. Why do you want to impoverish yourself? To appreciate the gift of food. So Benji said, when you hear your stomach growl before Mincha or by Nila, then you understand and you're on the track to understand the story. The story has to do with giving up for one day sexuality, relations, issues, the whole story, not for the purpose of negating or of trying the body and all of this, but for the purpose of seeing how it feels when you don't have it, so that you could appreciate it. And when you get up, everybody. That Ma'ariv, to me, Motzi Yom Kippur, is one of the highlights of my religious experiences. Somehow, everybody's running home, even me, ready to go, but that 5-minute Ma'ariv, somehow, aside from being like in a certain euphoria state, because there's no virus, what do you do? But aside from that, just the experience of a quick 5-minute, 3-minute Ma'ariv, in that context, for me, always took on a certain uplift, a certain feel of uplifting. Okay, I'm sure not for everybody and for different things. Okay, so the basic point was this. So what I want to say, what's the point? So what do we see? By coming in with a different meaning of the words, okay, with a different structure, that instead of dealing with what happened per se, without any indication except from the text itself as it unfolds, without any indication what the text wants, what is it teaching, what is it saying, okay? By coming in armed with fearfulness, and it's being fixed or being remained in the person, this now opened up, as a simple example, inquiry, where I learned something about the ancient world. I didn't know that in the Roman Greek period, meekness was a virtue. That was new for me. I never knew that. And I'm sure 99 out of 100 Meforshim, they didn't know. They didn't know unless they were familiar with the society at the time and so on and so on. They didn't know. So what do we see? We see that included in the methodology is asking a number of questions, giving answers, and then following them through, which require different information and so forth. And so out of a little thing comes an opener to a different understanding of the story. So, one could say, look, you can go back, ayin panim la Torah. You don't have to take a stand which is correct. You have to take a stand as to whether or not the text can carry one, two, or both. So I say, in the time of Moses, unlike the time of the prophets, and very much unlike the time of the Chazal, which is 800 years later. 800 years! 800 years! In the time of Moses, manliness was a big, fantastic thing. And weakness of any type was looked down upon as not being the ideal situation. Manliness was, in the Moses period, a big virtue. And it would never mean humility. And nor would it mean meekness in the sense that it was applied to kings. Manliness was a very, very fundamental quality of the human being. So, the value of this as a methodology cannot be denied. Because it opens up questions and searching for answers that you would never have thought of. To wit, who were the Meforshim that wrote this way about the text? Nobody. So we, in our generation, where I'm standing from, oh yes, overcoming your fears is the fundamental characteristic, the fundamental task of contemporary civilization. Because these fears are all over the place, and unless they're overcome, they block creativity, advance, and so forth. Okay, so this was this first idea of the story. Okay, now, Joseph and his brothers. Well, shall I take first Esau and Yaakov? So right there, you know, Yaakov was afraid. He was afraid that Esau would take revenge from what he did to him. Okay, so he had the fear. I mean, you could see it in the language. He was afraid, and so what did he do? He said, "Okay, I'm going to tackle that fear." So he designed a strategy of taking a chance, jumping in, taking a chance that he'd be destroyed, that Esau would be waiting for him, right? So he took a chance, he overcame the fear, okay, and he designed, the decision to overcome the fear, went together with a way that he'll succeed. So he took the women and the animals, and he made separation, and he discovered or worked out a strategy that was based on his taking a chance and overcoming the fear. Okay, great. That's an example of a story where he had the fear and he overcame the fear. But what do we see? He meets Esau. Esau comes and kisses him. His whole life after that thing, from the time he had the eating of the bracha and all the rest from Yitzchak, his whole life had a component in it, in stream of consciousness that popped up every once in a while, like in human being, of, oh boy, I better keep away Esau. Oh, I just heard Esau is in town. He's going to a movie. I better better not get too close. Guaranteed.
He didn't feel guilty.
No,
guilt.
Guilt has nothing to do with guilt. Sometimes there is connect, other times there's not connect. Here we see a simple illustration.
I disagree.
Oh, okay, what you want to say about the guilt?
It's impossible to feel guilt without being convicted in your conscience that you've done something wrong.
Yeah, okay, so you could put it in. Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I want to make it simple, but you could amplify.
But he can be fearful.
You could amplify.
And I'll think you did something wrong.
Right, but you could. But you're right. There are different. As you get into it and you start to work with it, you'll see different types, different combinations, different types of fearfulness. Mm-hmm. Especially the basic one is man-made and not man-made, and then others that go with guilt and so on. All that is built into the explication of the story. But what do we see? That sometimes he thought, look, he spent 40 years after that event having to tone himself down and not get excited and not lose focus and be able to continue working without getting crazy by just having the thought of Esau. When Esau came into his head, he turned red. I mean, that's life. I mean, that happens to every one of us. So what we see in this case, he overcame the fear. The overcoming forced upon him, necessity is the mother of invention, forced upon him an idea to get through it, to succeed. Okay? And at the same time, what happened was that he looked back and said, oh my God, look at all the psychological effort I put in from this little event, okay? And I assumed that Esau was doing the same thing from the opposite side. I was worried about his taking revenge, and Esau was saying, the hell with it, it don't mean nothing. And Esau said, I'm getting on with my life. I'm not going to waste my energy pursuing Yaakov and everything. Are you kidding me? I'm on top of it. Because it happened at the time. At the time, he wasn't on top of it. But we assumed, and the reader was meant to assume, that he still was on top of it. The text is teaching you, be careful of those things. You think you're on top of it, and you're designing plans and everything, but it could be the case that, as it is the case, the world changed. Aesop changed. And so one has to be very careful about overcoming the fear, making strategies to overcome it, to succeed, and thinking about the implications and the result. And it could be, just like I said before about the corporation, you have to rethink the situation. The situation has power, has efficacy, has meaningfulness, affects you now, right now, when it happens. But as it sinks into memory, it loses that emergency, that urgency. And so all of this is coming from an alternative beginning point to define the notion of Anav Mikol Adam with the correction that David made. And we see here's another example of overcoming fear with a different result. Okay, so now we have Isaac giving the bracha to mistaken identity. As you know, in the Chumash text, there's a triple trop. The note is he trembled. In the text, there's a triple note, one of the very few, I don't think more than 5, 6, where he bestowed a bracha on a mistaken identity. Okay? And I don't think you can do that. You can't. A bracha is a real thing, and once you bestow it, it takes effect on the person. You can't bestow a bracha on a person on a mistaken identity. Okay, so he trembled. He trembled. He said he made a big mistake. How does he correct it? He was afraid of his whole understanding and his whole use of bracha was on the line. Okay, so the net result was he found a loophole, and he made a bracha retroactive. So he made another one. He couldn't take it away. He didn't mevatel. He didn't make void the bracha he gave to Yaakov. He let it stand on a mistaken identity, but he gave another bracha to Esav. And this was the basic orientation. Yosef and his brothers, yeah.
Do you think he really mistook, like...
Huh?
Do you really think that he mistook the identity?
Well,
I mean, the question is like...
that's a point. That's a good point. I mean, that's a big question in terms of the whole story. All that comes into the picture when you're starting to analyze. All I'm trying to get across here is that when you come in, I said it many times, which I learned that when you have no statement, you can't bounce a different view off the statement. Like I gave my favorite example about non-Euclidean geometry. Before Riemann and Lobachevsky in 1830 and so forth, geometry meant Euclid. Geometry meant Euclid, period. When you use the word geometry, geometric, you meant Euclid. After Lobachevsky and Riemann of what we call non-Euclidean geometry, okay, you can't use the word geometry without further clarification. You have to say, oh, I'm talking about Euclidean geometry. I'm not talking about Lobachevsky geometry where parallel lines, blah, 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 blah. So what happened? What happened? When you didn't have anything, you had one. You can't bounce anything off. There's nothing to bounce. There's no alternative opinion. If you read the philosophy of mathematics literature after Lobachevsky and Riemann and before, you will see all over the place how they had to develop a new language about sets, new language to explain the differences. It never entered consciousness. It never entered consciousness. It wasn't a reality. So of course it never entered consciousness, and therefore it was never spoken about. In my own work on Moshe, I said that the first piece was on the secret silence of Moses, and the second piece was on the monotheism of Moses. So the reader could ask, you just said in this first piece that Moses used the names of God to talk about man, not the names of God, not man to talk about God. Okay, this was the basic motif of the book. We put it on the jacket. That was the blitz, that Moses said, I'm going to use the names of God to talk about the human being. Okay? And this is what he did. And instead of the way around. Okay, but then the next piece was the monotheism of Moses. So if he was non-theist, where's the idea come in that there's a monotheism? So I gave an explanation. The monotheism that Moses had, that was compatible with his non-theism, was limited to the origin of the universe. There was one question that never entered his mind. It enters our mind because we have alternatives. In the ancient world, there is no culture that, as far as my knowledge, that had it as a question how the world began, other than giving a theological answer in the form of a cosmogony or whatever. But the question did not arise. Today, go around, ask people, do you believe in God? Everybody will say yes. Everybody. But, except the scientists, where from Newton on, God is irrelevant to physics. Newton was very interested in the Bible, as you know. He wrote and he thought and everything about the origin of the universe, blah, 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 blah. But he didn't give a theological answer. He didn't give a theological answer to the question. So, I say, the monotheism of Moses was exactly like today. You ask any Jew, for example, do you believe in God? Aside from a scientist, you believe in God. But his belief in God is limited to one question: the origin of the universe. Everybody says, the standard opinion today of educated professors, everybody, the standard opinion is, except if you're a scientific mind, the standard view is that the universe can't be by itself. It has to be made. It has to be made by a maker, by a creator. I say, I discovered this 60 years ago. In philosophy, what kind of an analogy is that? Yes, when I make a bottle, I can describe the condition before it was made, the materials and everything else, and the whole story. So I can then say, oh, the whole world, the whole universe, the total, it's like a bottle that was made by somebody. It can't be made by itself. And I said, whoever said that that's an alternative? That's an assumption. What do you mean it can't be made by itself? That's not the alternative. The alternative is, it is. That's all you can say about it. You can't say anything else. Because to say anything else means you're going to go from the unknown to the known. You're going to have an explanation that has more mystery and more lack of understanding than what you're explaining. And so when I discovered that, I realized that I'll continue studying the philosophy on the existence of God and all the rest. But there was a realization that there's something wrong with the question. What I'm saying is that in Moses and Moses' time, there was no alternative. Nobody had that. There wasn't a decision. You see, it was like geometry before non-Euclidean geometry. There was no option. Because what I discovered in philosophy especially, if you only have one, it disallows you to get high-level restrictions and constrictions on what you're saying and what it means. If you have two, wow, what a bracha. To bounce one opinion off another opinion forces higher conceptual constraints, more understanding, more knowledge, and so forth. And so one, it's not accidentally that in the religious terminology, Echad is predicated by Kodesh Baruch Hu because it's in a league by himself. We can't say anything that is meaningful, that makes sense. Like in Rambam and so what people said, you can't predicate existence of God. If you can't predicate existence, so there's nothing there. No, there's something there, but you can't predicate existence. Well, that tells the person that we're in the domain of no man land.
What did you write about Joseph?
I have there about Yosef that
the brothers were
the brothers would fear. The brothers had this fear that he would get even. He would.
Yeah.
They didn't listen to the dream. They sold them to the Mitzrayim and all of this business. And so their whole life had a stream of consciousness in it that was worried about that. Okay, and it turned out not the case.
Yeah.
The fear was overcome by then because they didn't want to come down to Egypt and because they were afraid and they didn't know it was Joseph, he was the leader, blah, 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 blah. And they overcame that and they got the surprise in their lives that nothing bad happened to them. They feared that the dreams had some truth and they didn't recognize it. And they were concerned with how he would relate. And so the same analysis comes. You come into the text, you ask the question methodologically, where is the fearfulness? What was being feared? By whom? In what context? What was the fear? And then the question is, was the fear overcome or not overcome, and what were the consequences?